and don't I don't know, man. There's such a critical. There we go. I think we're back on now. Yeah, there we go. All right, now we have like an actual signal here. Sorry, everybody.
Perfect.
Just going back to it, I wish that we had more resources for handling NPCs and for automating not just their interactions with players, which are bad enough in almost every single game except for AD&D and games that make use of reaction rolls or encounter reactions, but
Mhm.
then took it a step further and started automating interactions with other NPCs and giving us standards for, okay, if I want to have a trainer disappear all of a sudden, then how do I do it? And if I want somebody who's nominally friendly to the party to become hostile, maybe on the intrusion of some other character, or if I want a friendly character to do something bad to the party that he thinks was helpful on account of some other hostile character, you know, informing a bad guy of where the party is and justifying an ambush. It's almost like a separate game at that point, and probably Vampire the
Yeah,
Masquerade might have dealt with this at some point. I don't think a lot of other games are doing it.
yeah. That's what I like. It's like I tried to sort of articulate their use, and then I kind of was hoping that the reader would kind of figure out what they wanted to actually kind of do with the NPC. Um, at at the same time, those personality tables are so good, and I was trying to like maybe I should have done something where I like included some sort of like riff on the appendix, or not appendix, the NPC personality tables in the DMG, but uh, it was kind of difficult to do without like cribbing wholesale, and I was already kind of feeling a little weird about doing it with the leveling that I suggested, the leveling costs.
Yeah,
So
I started. Oh, here's a reference. I started doing this after I played Baldur's Gate 3. I was trying to figure out a way of getting player characters. This is probably something we could finish off on. I find it really difficult to just kind of improvise NPC interactions and to improvise like player character backstories, because at this point I'm like, all right, well, why do I care? This is a lot of effort for something that I'm not necessarily going to see value in at all, unless
mhm.
either I can write something which very much imposes on the campaign, and if the DM lets me, then great. But you're gambling there, and I might not see it
Mhm.
anyways. Or I could just play and have a decent time, but then I'm kind of stuck. When it comes to having character interactions with other people, that's pretty difficult. And I was trying to
Mhm.
model. I was like, okay, what feels really good about Baldur's Gate 3? Which, believe it or not, a lot of the companion interactions are can be shallow, depending on bugs in your playthrough,
Sure.
but still feel really good and still feel really natural. How do I play a character in Baldur's Gate 3 was my question. How do I know what kind of person is there any kind of pattern to the decisions that I'm making that is in any way divorced from just my personality? Is there anything like that? What I figured out over time was yes, there is. It's my interactions with my companions. If I have companions and I see that they approve of certain actions and disapprove of other actions, I tend to favor certain companions more, depending on the playthrough, than other companions. And I figured it out. I was like, oh, I become a character. I start playing a character who is divorced from myself by interacting with these NPCs. And provided the NPCs provide there are multiples of these NPCs, and they are in some way ever so slightly off kilter from one another, even the ones who are, at the very least, off kilter from one another, then I will start prioritizing them
Mhm.
and start inventing a character as a result. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in a lot of these NPC systems. And I feel like you did that on the player side, successfully did this on the player side
Mhm.
by asking players to commit basically to some treasure they wanted to fill out not to invent a backstory whole cloth, but to invent objectives from which a character backstory or a personality could be defined.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was kind of going for. Because I mean, if the players kind of provide you kind of a personal antagonist, they have something to do in the downtime, just by default. So
That was the one player thread that went fallow that I might be able to recover actually. Like we had a random session that was just like Hunt Showdown, basically. I ripped off I don't know if you played Hunt Showdown, I just ripped it off. I was like, alright, there's a necromancer over here who's like stitching together different zombie body parts. The Necromancer College in the upper right hand corner of the map has not sanctioned him, and they're actually quite worried because a bunch of their students have gone missing now, and they want you to take care of it. They did. It's just a random one-off session because I needed to like not focus on the big bad evil guy or the plot. And to your point, to many of your points earlier, because just by virtue of him escaping, the players hunt him down every opportunity they get. It went for fallow for months until players randomly encountered on a completely separate quest with a caravan, encountered a dwarf hold that had gone completely dark, and found an NPC in there, and like one of the few living dwarves in the hold remaining, with his 2 daughters and a whole lot of undead. And they were like, "It's him!
Yeah.
It's him! It's gotta be him!" And so we had 3 separate groups converge on that one location and nearby, just to go in and try to mess him up as much as possible. And they were still delving it as early as recent as 2 weeks ago.
Wow, no, that's a triumph. You should be proud of that.
It was by accident, and again, it was your NPC interactions and your commands basically for the players. What if somebody was trying to develop proper questions? If somebody was trying to develop like proper quests for their players to kind of generate investment and generate. Again, D&D is a player focused, is a player facing engine. It's not a DM facing engine, and that's probably the problem with trying to create an NPC engine. You might be able to do it. You probably can do it. It's probably not difficult to do it. If we like, assuming that we sat down for 2 months and dedicated 40-hour weeks to it. That's what I mean by not difficult. It's probably a dumb way.
You mean that it's possible?
Yeah. It's what are your what are your targets? If you're sitting down to write your second book, and you want to focus on the player-facing engine of D&D, what are you putting in that book?
Okay, so anybody who's like listening, or anybody who listens to this later, I highly recommend you go into Google or the search engine of your choice and type in the 10-minute backstory. And I think it's on like Giants in the Playground forums like years and years and years ago. But it's like a single page, and it kind of isolates like different points in like what a like kind of like, I think it does a really good job of distilling what you're sort of looking for in your players. I would go a step further and say like even you could kind of shave it down to like a 1-minute backstory, and you'd be just fine. But it's sort of like the big points it does is it asks you to have 2 allied NPCs and 1 antagonistic NPC. And that's really helpful, because then like every PC comes in with like a little support group or rather like a network, not support group, a network of other kind of personalities that kind of the setting. And then the other point I think was really interesting was the pick 2 secrets for a player character. One that the player character knows and is hiding from everybody, and one that the player character doesn't know and may find out later.
Ooh, that's
so
really good.
It'd be like, in this case, yeah, it's a really interesting little document. Again, it's like 5 lines. And
I'm reading it right now.
I think it's Giants in the Playground.
Step 1, write 5 things about your character's concept and background. 5 things that you think are the most essential parts of your character. Pretty easy, especially in 5e. There's backgrounds. Step 2. Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
List 2 goals for the character that you as a player think would be cool to see accomplished in game.
Mhm.
And there's a little reward structure that it includes here. 2 secrets about your character. Step 3. Oh, that's cool. Step 4. Describe 3 people that are tied to the character through blood, romance, or honor. 2 of them are friendly, 1 is hostile. All can do something useful for you if you get the situations to line up. And if you like, you can include an enemy of yours here as well, so I have an instant NPC nemesis to throw at you. And step 5 is describe 3 memories that your character has. This is really interesting to me. Okay, 2 things happen. 1, I got really mad at the rest of the bros when we were talking about patrons. This was like 2 years ago, and I just never got over it. We're talking about patrons. I'm like, it kind of seems like there's some things that aren't necessarily problems, but that new people are not going to recover from if they mess up. And it could go way worse than it did in this campaign, so it's really going to get bad. And they're like, nah, you could just tell people to design the scenario. And so I started writing down notes at the time for a different game to figure out like how should you generate patrons. And I was adapting that advice for the Chilmus Valley module as of recent, so I could finally get this thing off my plate. And the recommendation was, when you generate a patron, you write down 1 person who is friendly, and they can have up to 1 ally among the remaining patrons, and they must start with 2 hostile or antagonistic patrons. What, to your mind, I'll follow up with the second one later, what to your mind is the value of starting off with a nemesis in particular?
Because people respond to conflict. So the important thing about that little document is, like, I never required it of my players. It was one of those things where if the player kind of came to me and was like, I'm feeling directionless, I don't really know what I want this character to do, I would point them to that and say, just check that out and see if it helps you collect your thoughts. And I found that, a player character having like a nemesis is like they have something to respond to, something to focus on and respond to. So like you can, like, some players can like think a little more like laterally and more abstractly. So like when you present them with like a regional problem, they kind of are able to kind of get to work on that regional problem, and then they kind of develop a character over time, and they're fine with that. Some people really do kind of want to have that direction kind of out the gate, and I think having those allies and nemesis is a great way to sort of like anchor that kind of character in the world, and then you can point them in a concrete direction, and you don't feel like kind of lost at sea.
Yeah, and they're choosing it, because what I was worried about was some ankle biter might click on this. I don't know if you know about these people. Some RPG varmint might click on this later and say, but wait, you said not to worry too much about big bad evil guys, and they're not critical to a campaign. And so why are you now asking the player to give you an evil guy? I imagine you have an answer to this already.
Evil guy. I mean, oh yeah. So like, so the nemesis. I should probably start to piece together the nemesis that had sent the goons that ended up shanking the player in the street. That nemesis is a bounty hunter.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's like it's a lot of these nemesis are limited in scope, and they're focused on the PCs. So it's like nobody's like, oh, and my nemesis, like my hostile NPC is this super lich who's trying to like snuff out the sun. It's like nobody's like coming at you with this world-ending threat. They're coming with you with either something very personal or something kind of contained. So like, the person is always sort of like a goon or a mook, like at the end, like relative to like a kind of a true catastrophe. That's a good way to put it. The people that the players will invent are not catastrophes. They're antagonists. It's different.
Yeah. Okay. And they're so we have the scale. That's one component. We have the
Hmm.
scale. That's one component. We have the opportunity to turn it into larger adventure without requiring it to turn into larger adventure. If it's a bounty hunter and somebody has hired that bounty hunter, well, the player can say yes or no. But they've invented the bounty hunter as the person who is the object of their hatred, right? Maybe they think, oh well, if I get rid of the
Correct.
bounty hunter, then I don't have to worry about it again, or I'll be so strong, I'll be so stacked at that point that if I get rid of this one, I can be confident that the next ones are not going to be a problem. Then
Right.
you have like the personal investment angle, because the whole point of our objection when it came to Big Bad Evil Guys was don't put a lot of ego investment and don't put a lot of work into something that has to be that is required to be engaged with and requires the players to be invested and requires the players to respond,
Right.
right? And this meets neither of those. The players are giving you their investment. They're signaling their investment from the get-go by saying,
Yeah.
just by responding to this, it's saying that they want it. And second, it's not something, by virtue of not being a catastrophe, it's not something that the campaign has to deal with or has to center around. You know?
Right. Exactly. There's nobody's feelings are getting hurt, if the players ignore it or something. So like there was like little breadcrumbs about this, like the bounty hunter coming to town for a while, but like the player sort of played his character very like lying low to avoid it, and so he hadn't had a problem. The second he did something sort of like where he kind of got hailed as a hero in the region, that's when people started tailing him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like, so yeah, so you just kind of have this very interesting sort of it's like you just like it's an event. It becomes like a downtime event or around the session event, or it's not, but it's not a world ending one. So yeah, the scale's just not there, like to your point.
Right. Signaled to the play. Everything has been signaled to the players in a way that, like,
Yeah.
it's not like a tornado coming down on top of them in the city all of a sudden. Like, hey, by the way, this is gonna. By the way, by the way, by the way, and then it happens, and people are, yeah, of course that was gonna happen. It's like, take an example from Baldur's Gate 3. You have Astarion, he's the vampire spawn that you're traveling with. Very happy that he can suddenly walk in the sun on account of this Mind Flayer tadpole in his head. And you come across, throughout the game, you're told about Cazador, this vampire who's going to do something really bad. And among other things, if you care about Astarion, is going to do something really bad to him in particular. And already did a bunch of bad things to Astarion in particular. He doesn't want to go back. But, right in Act 1, there's just a bounty hunter who happens to be looking for vampire spawn. And so that's an example of like a personal entity. That's the perfect scale for just a player. If nothing else, a player is just feeding you an extra encounter to put inside your notebook. And so that's not the same kind of encounter as the big bad to Astarion, the big bad evil guy, or to the campaign as a whole of Baldur's Gate 3, the big bad evil guy, the big bad evil brain. I can say at this point. Right?
Yeah.
It's neither of those things. It's just a bounty hunter encounter, and that's the sort of thing that your players will feed you with because it's in their wheelhouse. Second thing that was interesting, and we could close off on this, was the encounter that you used. Oh man, the encounter that you used. No, it was crap. You did interviews on the book, I think in preparation for the book, or maybe. Yeah, it was a Roll & Bones interview, I'm pretty sure. And Jeffro had mentioned, it was so funny, Jeffro had engaged in some dismay that you had these backstory forums. And I thought about what I was doing in Chilmus Valley. It's an 8th level game. Players start off with some magic items. It's an 8th level it's an 8th level start module, so people who made it to 8th level or are going to, for once, encounter some high level play in Chilmus Valley, and they're just going to start off at 8th level. Okay. They need some magic items. There's like a minimum expectation for magic items just to set the tone there. So when my players are making characters, they have a long list of instructions, like don't make a character name that starts with A, reroll until you get at least 2 15s for your stats, and provide me with what used to be the instruction was request a magic item or assets equivalent to magic items that have roughly a combined rarity of like very rare in 5th edition terms. And that made things, occasionally, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And then I watched your interview with Rolling Bones and I figured out a solution to it. And I said, okay, give me a wish list instead of telling people to like try to game a combination. And sometimes people would okay, so there was that interview, and one of my players actually gave me, instead of saying I want this specific combination, they just gave a full list of things that they like. After a little bit of back and forth, they were like, okay, it seems like we're not making progress. Here's a lot of stuff that I would like. If you could figure out some combination of these, if you just pick randomly out of a combination of these, I'll be fine with it. But I do like these items in particular. This is my list. I said, oh, there it is. I started asking, instead I adjusted the instructions, provide a list of items that you want, because you'll be able to leverage it, or I'll be able to leverage it into making sure they appear in magic item tables during the campaign, because 5e magic item tables are not terribly handy, and they're really bad actually, and I would just like to put in the stuff that, if I'm making my own tables anyways, what's the harm in putting in the stuff that my players actually want? And so they started doing that, and I said, awesome, I have like this target for stuff I could put in my player characters, that I could put in their games. This is something that we could finish off the discussion with. How willing should the DM be, the aspiring master of the living campaign, how willing should they be to include content that positive content, player targets that the players have specifically requested and will persist probably for the rest of the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of, I think it's a question of kind of what specifically they're requesting. Mm-hmm. So,
like rewards in this case, like magic items, ships, domains.
Oh yeah, well, that's just telling you what they want, and if it exists within the game, I see like there's a pathway to get there, generally. So, and if they're even kind of putting in, because it's like, okay, I'm not gonna, if they're like, oh, I want to be a lord of a land, I'm not gonna expect them to like understand like the minutia of like English inheritance law in order to kind of get their their little piece of like lordship. So, but as long as they kind of act like their characters are tilted in that direction, like, okay, I'm doing this stuff, I'm gonna specifically seek out kind of like high ranking nobles to do like cool things for them, like hoping they'll reward me. It's like, yeah, like they're moving in that direction, yeah, and they're doing things that kind of make a certain logical sense, like even if it might be, it's like, it's not historically literate, like who cares? It makes sense. It follows like a logical progression, and it's like, as long as they're sort of acting in that way, I think they're like I don't see a problem with sort of rewarding them with their goal, in the long run. So
or preparing for it.
That's kind of how I would balance it. Or preparing for it, yeah, absolutely.
You might not have prepared those. Technically speaking, the dozen nobles or so aren't on your initial list of dramatis personae, if that's how it's pronounced, to prep for the campaign starts. But it's probably okay to do, session 2 or so. This is one thing that I wish people were more familiar with. I think this is an advantage that we have, having played in Westmarch's campaigns before doing living campaigns or grand campaigns. I call them grand campaigns, you call them living campaigns. Mm-hmm. The advantage that we have is the standard for Westmarches is the session. There is no game night. The session doesn't happen until the party has already been rounded up and declared their goal, and is committed to it, right? So we don't have to. We don't feel bad about preparing a dungeon level for a particular dungeon before the game starts, because the players have said we are going to this dungeon, and not just like during the prior session. The condition for getting the session started to begin with was you have to tell me what your goal is, because that's what we will play that night, and if you don't have a goal, we will not play that night. And so you play the you do the dungeon. That's fine. It seems like it's an okay bit of, it seems like it's fine to, again, the player facing, you're just taking advantage of the player facing engine of D&D.
Yeah, it's a way for them to input into the game. Everything they contribute to the game is one less thing you have to plan. That's like one little bit of time and brain power saved for something that like matters.
Oh yeah. I think that's a good spot to end it on.
Perfect.
Oh man. Well, that was a really long show, but I had a fucking fantastic time.
Yeah, me too. It was good. I appreciate you having me on, by the way.
Absolutely. We should do like a shorter part 2 to this sometime.
Oh yeah, I'd be open. I'm probably gonna do a second round eventually. I don't know. I haven't even
learned more about like what would be in a book 2 and what you've used so far, or generating some more of this stuff. I have so many notes in here that I wasn't able to get to, but
I'm really glad. Even if it's like this is it, the sales are done. I'm like, the reaction I've gotten so far was worth it. I'm very happy. So,
dude, you killed it.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
It's a really good book. It's not just here's a compilation of advice that everybody should know. It's like, no, if somebody's going to sit down and play the game for the first time, or is seeking to recover from bad advice that they've received in the past, and they know that they've received bad advice, but they don't know the better way, it's good. And for people who, quote, know the better way already, it's still good. Just because I know how to do algebra in my head doesn't mean that an algebra textbook is bad, or, God forbid, somebody would say useless. And this is so much more. It's difficult to put into words, but it's so much more than just a checklist. It's a reminder. It's a mental. Here we go. You've released a book which is a coherent, and I will declare complete mental model for running a grand campaign.
That might be the highest compliment I have yet received. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, we are going to pass out and sign off. I appreciate everybody sticking through the technical troubles. This will probably get re-uploaded as several different parts, especially if I can recover some of the lost footage. But it says that we've been live for... Oh no, that live button is not actually how long we've been live for. We've been recording for about 3 hours and 18 minutes, and I think that actually I started recording about like 20 minutes after we got started, because... I started streaming immediately, but I didn't start recording until about 20 minutes afterwards. I had to unpause it.
Gotcha.
I think we can recover everything. Sweet. All right, so I'm going to stop the stream here. Thanks again, folks. New videos coming soon. The second part of Your First Adventure is coming. I think we're just going to record and do it tomorrow. I'd like to just... Wait, no, I can't. I'm running a really big session tomorrow. Okay, Monday then. And then, of course, we've got... John, where can people find you, and where can people find your book, besides the description of this video?
So the book is on Amazon at the moment. It is The Living Campaign. You can kind of search it with that, or by my name or something. And I am on Twitter at McGowan John N, or X. And I also have a Substack where I sort of like write like articles as they kind of hit me, and it is going to be a repository for my own fiction. So I am gonna probably the next kind of little project I'm gonna be working on is like an adventure, like an adventure story. So like yeah. So that's gonna be where I'm at. So my Substack is johnmcgowan.substack.com, I believe. So, and that should get you there.
All right, this is exciting. I didn't even get to talk about the Wadabow generator, which you reference explicitly in the book. You explicitly reference an online tool that will just make something for you.
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, he just wants to go get his stuff out. So I figured it'd be okay to like say him by name, and I don't think he'd care if I just directed people to him.
I think it's awesome,
and it's free. It's free.
Yeah, no, I use it, man. I export these as PNGs and import them into Incarnate, so I could like tear them apart and change them, and I fill them up with Appendix A. Awesome.
Yep.
This dungeon is a Wadabow dungeon. Mostly, there's a few things in here that are not his, but this is just I imported it as a token and then painted over it. So this is you have been playing through our nice little interview narrative, a Wadabow dungeon.
This looks great. I wouldn't even ever have guessed. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. All right, folks. I'll see you later.